I'm Christine Dunbar from speechmodification.com, and this is my Smart American Accent training. Welcome to our Saturday live question and answer class. You can put your questions in the chat at any time, and I'll answer them for you live. If you're watching later on as a replay or joining us later, you can leave questions in the comments. I do go through the comments on my channel, give you answers, add your words to my list to cover in a future class, or refer you to videos that have answers and help for your questions. So today I want to start by talking about a couple of words, two that sound the same and one that sounds different. We'll talk a little bit about spelling and vowel sounds, give you a little bit of help for these words, but just in general, help building your skills and that foundation for understanding spelling, reading, and pronunciation in English. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to have a start of a new series talking about reading, decoding, and sight reading, so stay tuned to the channel to check that out. It's really a way to think about pronunciation in terms of learning reading and spelling as well. So, of course, for many of us, the challenge with English is speaking fluently, pronouncing things correctly, but when we go back to the basics of understanding the sounds, the letters, the symbols, sometimes that can be very helpful. So, related to that topic, we have the word Reek with the WR sound. So WR at the beginning of words the W is a silent letter here. So in words like reek, wreck, wrench, wretch, etc., that W is a holdover from a previous spelling and pronunciation. So you can just think of it as not even making any sound there. So we're starting, our initial sound in Reek is the sound. Then this word does follow the spelling rules or the spelling patterns of English, where the letters EA, most of the time, about 95% of the time, they're going to say the E sound, like in green tea. That's the most typical spelling for the E is EA or EE. It's a high tense front vowel. So the word reek, and then it ends with the K sound, is actually the exact same pronunciation as this word reek. They just have different spelling and different meaning. So I've rewritten reek here for you with this spelling because it's more straightforward. Of course, EE or EA both do say the E sound. I think people can really picture that tense E when they see two E's together, like in see or seen, etc., seed. So this reek has the meaning of to inflict on someone, and usually we use it in the phrase to wreak havoc. So that means to cause destruction, confusion. To wreak is usually to inflict something bad on someone or something else. So, for example, that schedule change really is really going to wreak havoc with the rest of the week, for example. This reek means to smell very bad. So that dirty laundry really reeks. We also sometimes use it figuratively to say, similar to that stinks, as in that's too bad. Usually it's more literally used to talk about smells, but sometimes we use it figuratively to say a situation is bad, or something's wrong with it, or we're not happy with it, we don't like it. And then when we move to wreck, we see here, again, we have our W is silent, so we're starting with our sound. And this also follows the rules, where letter E, typically when it's by itself, about 85% of the time, I believe, will say the vowel, like in red tent. So the EA saying E, the letter E saying and then the letters CK are just way at the ends of words that we just say the K sound. So with reek, or a word like seek, we typically spell it just with the K sound. When we have that vowel or another lax vowel, we tend to spell it with two letters, like in sick and sack. The digraph here is something that often we'll say that we're using quote-unquote short I or short A, or in this case, short E. I typically don't teach with long and short, although I do have a video talking about that terminology. That's typically used for understanding reading and spelling. It's less helpful for pronunciation. Here we're just talking about the I vowel and the A vowel. There's not a word with S-E-K, but a similar word would be deck, or like we have here, rec. So the double letters there, the double consonants, are one signal and one pattern to say that we're going to be using that that lax vowel, rather than in a word like seek or meek, when we have single consonant double vowel, we're using the tense E sound. Wreck is to ruin. So people sometimes also use this in certain places. The car was in a wreck. We use it to say an accident. Wreck actually means to ruin. So if the car is wrecked, it's completely destroyed. That's gonna wreck things for us. It's going to ruin things for us. The most typical meaning here is ruin, but sometimes people say they had a wreck on the highway. That could mean a wreck, like a wrecked car, so we can use it as a noun, or people will use wreck as another noun to mean accident. So a lot of different meanings here, two different pronunciations, E and reek and wreck. Sometimes you'll hear when people say that phrase, wreak havoc, they will say it as wreck havoc, but that's actually incorrect. It should be the E vowel for EA, wreak havoc. I did see in Merriam-Webster both pronunciations listed there for wreak havoc, because it's a common enough error that it's going to start to eventually be correct to say wreak or wreck for this word. But I recommend for now staying with the correct original pronunciation of eek rather than moving to the ek. You can see there's a similarity in the meaning, but to wreak is to inflict, to make it happen. To wreck is it's wrecked. So if you were using wreak havoc, it would be incorrect and also be somewhat redundant. So little lesson on meaning, spelling, pronunciation on these particular words, but you can see how even just looking at everyday words, minimal pairs like this, words that sound the same, and breaking down the sounds and the spelling can really help you feel more confident in understanding and approaching new words, and checking your pronunciation on common things that you say and things that are less common. We're not using these words as typically, so we might not feel as confident using them. So I hope this, the videos here on the channel, the resources on my website, speechmodification.com, help you to build that confidence, learn about spelling patterns, learn about vowel sounds. Particularly, I would say my Sounds of English course on our website is going to help build skills like this, so that you can feel confident pronouncing any word smoothly, fluently, and confidently in English. Okay, thanks so much for sticking with me for that initial part. Let's turn now to your questions. If you're just joining us, you can put questions in the chat at any time, and I'm going to turn to those next. You can also leave a question in the comments, and I'll come back to those after class. Nice to see everyone here so far this morning. Not a lot of questions yet, so I'll turn to some questions on my to-do list from past requests. So let's take a look here. We have a request for the word Duke, like Duke and Duchess. So we might as well do Duchess as long as we're going to do Duke. Again, words that we don't use as much, not as common, but they might come up for you in some context, something you're reading, something that you're talking about if you're talking about royalty. So for Duke, we have a pattern of the letter E makes the letter U say oo. So sometimes people call this long U. Basically, I use a double vowel rule that if U is with another vowel like UI, it's going to say oo or U. And here we have the double consonants, and this U, is going to say the sound, vowel schwa. So here we have the U vowel, Duke, and here we have the vowel, Duchess, and then we have the ch is sound. So rewriting those, I would typically write that as Duke. Although OO does sometimes say right? In like took and rook, for example, hook. So often with K, it might be better to think of it as this spelling to make sure that you have the oo sound in your mind. So Duke and Duchess. Duke and Duchess. Okay, yes. And then we have a question about pronouncing the diphthong O in cold. Yeah, that's a challenging one because if I'm just saying, for example, code, and I'm using that O diphthong, the vowel I can just build from the O. So for example, I would say O, code. I have time to slide O. I start rounded, a little more open, and then I lift. So the O diphthong is a back vowel. It starts here kind of with the O and it moves to the sound. And the sound is not an O and an but rather the sound that happens as I slide between the two. O. For most people, if they're saying, especially in an open syllable like no or so, if you just hold it longer, O, no, so, you're going to naturally be able to close and have that sliding sound. But people find that more difficult than when they have to add a consonant sound. So again, building from the O, making sure you're doing that slide, then adding your consonants, O, code, and keeping that length even though you're adding the D sound. That's the first step. Then when we get to cold, you'll hear that it sounds a little different. So my L sound is going to affect my O. So you'll see in the dictionary, it is the O diphthong. In code, we just had one consonant before and after. In cold, what's happening here is that in the dictionary, you're just going to see the O and the L. But really, we do have a little bit of a schwa sound before that dark L. So you're going to hear it like co, and then before the dark L, a little bit of a schwa or an like ol, co, ol, d. And as I move from that rounded O to the unrounded schwa or before the L, I naturally have what's called vowel to vowel linking, where for a rounded vowel, the W sound is going to happen. Cold. So as I'm sliding, my rounded lips O unround, and that gliding happens. And so taking it very slowly and putting in all these sounds and then speeding it back up is going to help you sound natural when you're saying cold. So if I said it very slowly, cold, ol, so that to get the O and L combination, there's really the O diphthong, the W glide connecting them, and the sound. So I don't want to overdo cold with a strong W. It just happens naturally as I move from that rounded to unrounded vowel. So saying it slowly, cold. So those sounds are all happening, but just quickly as I move to the LD. I do have a video talking about old, hold, cold, sold, these vowels, and that vowel to vowel linking. So you can check that out on the channel or in our Sounds of English course to get more help for that kind of challenging combination. But that's a great question. So thank you for bringing that up. I'm sure a lot of people find that difficult and they have asked me about it before, because with that vowel to vowel linking, it makes it a little bit tricky. Okay, we have a question about tide versus tithe. So these are a minimal pair. The only difference is that we have a D sound here and we have the voiced the sound here. So the E is silent on tithe, but typically when we have a THE at the end, like in breathe, for example, a more common word, or seethe or soothe, that's going to be the voiced sound. The letter E will be silent, but it will make it will function like we're talking about with code or tide, where the I is going to say the I sound. So we have for the beginning of the word, we have the I diphthong. Sometimes I write it this way, like in tight. And in tide, tide. We're just closing or lifting the tongue behind the teeth to say our D. Tide, tide. If I'm saying the tide is, you're going to hear that D linking stronger. If I said the tide that we had, we're going to use an unreleased D. So how the D sounds at the end depends on the next vowel. When I'm saying tithe, I have, so tide versus tithe. We're going to have a continuing sound where my tongue is between my teeth, tithe, and the sound should continue a little bit. The rest of the word sounds the same. You just don't want to let that air stop, like tide. Then you're not going to be able to hear the difference between these. Because often with tide, I'm just going to stop the air. I won't necessarily release that D. But with tithe, I have to keep the air flowing. You're going to hear the th sound, tithe. And then if I'm saying tithing, or tithing, you're going to hear that really strong linking, and that th is going to be more clear, that continuing and flowing sound. So I do have a video, I believe, for breed and breathe. Breed and breathe. Those have the same contrast. Same thing with seed and seethe, for example. So check that out here on the channel. If you can't find it easily, first of all, you can use the search box right on the channel and type in the word you're looking for. And if I have a video for that, it'll pop up. If you have trouble or difficulty with that, leave a comment on this video or any of my videos, and I'll do the search for you and give you the link directly for the video that you're looking for that contrast. Yeah, again, not as common of words. Tide is like the ocean tide, and tithe is to make a payment or give part of your earnings, usually to a church, but you could tithe to a different organization as well. Okay, great. We have a question about the word martyr. So I do have a video for this. It's first syllable stress. Letters AR do say R in this word. So mar. Then we flap this T. It's going to sound a little bit more like a D. And then the Y just says, it's just an sound. It's an unusual spelling. So think about it like martyr. Now, that's not that easy for some people to do the double R's, like similar to order or murder. It's also like the word harder. So I would build from the R. So R, mar, martyr. You can also build from the back. Der, ardor, martyr. Yeah, definitely not an easy word, but you can work on other words like smarter, harder, that also have that R and then that flap T or flap D and the sound. Okay, so if some of those words are easier than others, then you can use them to help you. And sometimes it's just being able to look at a word like martyr and know what the sounds are supposed to be, because the spelling is not very intuitive in that one. Okay, we have a question about drawer and drawers. Okay, so depending on what you're talking about, so a drawer, like a dresser drawer, or drawers, 3 drawers, is going to be the or diphthong. So I sometimes write it like the word roar. You could think of it just with OR. The W here is silent, so I think of this as drawer. We do also have someone who draws, could be called a drawer. That has the ah vowel. So that's more like thinking about like drawer, and the AW is the ah sound. Or drawers would be a Z sound. This isn't very commonly used, so it's better, I think, to think of the word drawer that like we have in a dresser or in a cabinet, and drawers has a Z sound. You know, it's not that this isn't a word, it's just not really very used, and it's going to confuse you when it comes to drawers. So this has the or sound, this has the ah, excuse me. Excuse me. This has the ah and so just like saw, draw, sawers, drawers. We don't use that as much. Drawers. Yeah. Okay. Hopefully that answers your question. I do have a video about drawer versus drawer as well. Okay, nice to see so many of you here today. Welcome, everyone. I'll try to get to all of your questions. If you ask multiple things, I will come back and revisit your second and third questions once I've given everyone at least one answer. And if I don't come back to your other questions, do please leave them in a comment for me so that I can give you some information or add your words to my list to cover in a future class. Okay. I have a question about resource as a noun and a verb. So typically with words that are nouns and verbs, if there's two different pronunciations, the noun is going to be stressed on the first syllable. So we have a resource for that. Resource. That would sound like resource. Again, you don't need the OAR. I'm thinking about the word roar, but you can just think about it being just the or sound, resource. But as a verb, I don't know that we actually use resource as a verb. We would maybe to use it as like resource something. So I could source something from somewhere. If I were to source it again, we would stress a little bit more on source and kind of some secondary stress on like we need to source that. No, we need to resource that. So it still would have some stress here, but you would kind of have a little bit more length and a little bit more drawn out, and definitely the stress on source versus resource. This source is going to be very short. So resource. I don't have a resource for that. We need to resource that. But usually we would just use source. We need to source that from somewhere. If you're going to have to get the resource. So unless I'm mistaken and there's another resource verb. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that question. We have a question about grammar. Some native speakers use simple past instead of past participle. So I should have went instead of I should have gone. Is this becoming more acceptable? I would probably say no. You're just going to hear that. Over time, language does change through usage, and people make grammar errors that eventually become correct. That one I do think is a common error that's made. But until something is completely switched over, I think as a non-native speaker, you're better off going with what you know is the correct grammar, even if you hear native speakers making those grammar errors around you, because you might be judged for poor grammar. Of course, if everyone around you is using one way of saying it that you know is maybe not the most correct grammar, but everyone uses it in your environment, then go ahead and speak that way too, because we do fit into our environment. But you could use the correct grammar, and I don't think it'll stand out to those people. Like if people around you saying, oh, he should have went there, and you say in some other conversation he should have gone there, they're not going to be like, oh, what's wrong with this guy? I don't think. I think using correct grammar is the best. I think where that becomes, there's a line where that becomes overly correct, like you don't want to correct other people necessarily if you're hearing that, and you also don't want to use some of the things that have switched over are, for example, if I'm saying the place to where I am going, people now don't really follow that rule of don't put a preposition at the end. They'll say the place where I'm going to or the place where I'm going without that preposition. So it is a judgment call, but I would say for the specific one you mentioned, I would stick with should have gone instead of should have went. Thank you for that question. Okay. We have a question about, so resource, whether it's an S or a Z sound, S sounds, resource. Although for the noun resources, I think just S. That's what I use, resource. We do say someone is resourceful with a Z sound. but I think we use S for the noun. Resources. Yeah, I would stick with S. Okay, great. We have a question about superior and inferior. So for superior, inferior, both of these are stressed on the second syllable. So we have the peer and fear. The letters ER in those are saying the E sound. So we have, you can say a little bit of an oo sound here, but you're also going to hear people just use superior. It's unstressed and short. So what you don't want is superior with a long, clear oo. It's going to have a very short and somewhat reduced oo, superior. Then we have our stressed peer, So think about it like su or a little bit reduced sa, peer, And then between the E and the we're going to have that vowel to vowel linking, ear, where a natural y sound happens there. That will help you make sure that there's 4 syllables. If I'm missing that vowel to vowel linking, it'll sound like superior. I'm going to kind of miss and have a challenge there. So superior. Same thing with inferior. We're going to have the ER here again says the ear sound, like in the word fear. Inferior, with a y linking that ear, inferior. So superior and inferior. Good words. Thank you for that. Okay. So we have a request for a full series of accent training in sequence. So I do have a few different series that you can go through. So I have a Sounds of English playlist here on the channel that will help you build the sounds one at a time. I also have a 30-day accent challenge that looks at common errors and helps you build skills over time. So check those out here on the channel. And then my American Accent 6-week course on my website, inexpensive online course, is going to walk you through the steps you need to change your accent. And my online course, The Sounds of English, is going to walk you through all of the English sounds, spelling, again, in an order that can help you build your skills to from a really strong foundation standpoint. So thank you for that request. Okay, nice to see so many of you here. Great questions today. I'm going to keep answering more of them. And again, as I said, I will try to come back to your second and third questions if I have time at the end. We have a question about words with TR and whether they're pronounced with exactly like CH. So for example, tree, whether or not you can say tree or true. So I do have a video for this as well. There are some speakers that really have kind of a lot of air when they're saying tree, where it sounds the same as tree. You still need a bit of an R sound there. I definitely would recommend, if you can, just doing t and tree. You don't really need that rounding of tree. Sometimes people teach the R as a rounded lip sound, and I think that is not necessary and can be a little bit confusing. There are different dialects of English and different native speakers of English who use more of a ch sound, but I would say generally no, you don't need it. You can just use the aspirated tree. So making sure that there's release of air before your R, tree. The tree, true, it's true. Not the tree and the true, but tree and true. No rounding required. People will give you different opinions. You'll see a lot of people say use CH. And if it helps you get the R sound and the T sound more accurately, it's not wrong. You can do it, but it's also not necessary and it's not universally used by native speakers. Okay, great. We have a question about the word password. So password is a compound noun, all one word. We have compound nouns that are 2 words, like hot dog. And we have compound nouns that are 1 word, like password or baseball. But the same pattern is true for all of these, that we have stress on both syllables, primary stress on the first syllable or first word, secondary stress on the second syllable or second word. So in password, my ah sound is going to be longer and held. I'm still going to have the say word the same way I would say it by itself. So it's like the word pass and the word word, which I'm rewriting here with ER because we don't say an or in word. The letters OR say the sound. But I'm going to hold this one longer, and this one is going to be a little shorter. Password, password. Unlike the difference there is that we have words like, for example, in the word student, it's not a compound word. It's not two nouns. It's not a compound noun, that is. It's not two nouns put together to make a new word. So we have stress here, but I don't say stew and dent. I say student, student. We really compress and reduce that unstressed syllable. I don't do that here. That would be like password, password. We have password, the full pronunciation, clear vowel in both syllables, just longer here, password. Yeah, great question, and an interesting topic. I have a lot of videos talking about compound nouns, both as single nouns and as noun phrases, and talking about how to stress those, how to recognize them in your speech, which words are those, and then a fairly recent podcast giving you some help and practice to start to use those naturally and fluently when you're speaking. Okay, great. We have a question about the word Appalachian and a lot of arguments about it, and there are a lot of arguments in my video on that here. In my video, I say you can say Appalachian or Appalachian, Appalachian with a sh sound or a ch sound. So there's a variety of ways that people pronounce it. Some of the people doing research are talking about, what they feel the original pronunciation based on Native American speakers is, and that's more close to Appalachian with the ah and the ch sounds. But depending on where you are, there are multiple things that are correct because people live in that region and they'll say it that way. So I've decided to go with Appalachian because I think that that's a little bit truer to the original way, but I also accept Appalachian because it's just a word that has multiple correct pronunciations. So sorry to be vague, but there are just some words, especially place names, that you should accept what people tell you that is correct for them, and as the speakers who are in that area talking about their place, which is going to be different. It's a huge region, a huge mountain range that covers north, south, and So thank you for that question. You can check out my video to hear multiple correct ways to say it. Okay. We have a question about martyr, like martyr. So going back to our word martyr, your question is, why does it sound like martyr with a D? So when we have T and D in the middle of words, we use what's called a flap sound. So in the word smarter, I spell that flap sound with the letter T. In the word harder, I spell that flap sound with the letter D, but it's the same sound. I'm not doing smarter and harder. I'm not using a true T or a true D where I'm stopping the air. What I'm doing is I'm lifting up for that T and D with my tongue, but it's just a light tap up and then it gets released down. And my voice is on. So it's closer to a D in terms of voicing, smarter, harder, but it's not stopping the air fully. It's not having a burst of air. And the flap sound, in some languages, they use that flap sound for an R. It's like one roll of a rolled R. So in Spanish, for example, they might have an R in the middle of the word like pero, and they're using a flap. So your language might might use a flap sound where there's an R in the middle of a word or even the start of a word. For American English, we use it for T's and D's in the middle of words many times. So that's why I write it with a D here, because the voice is on, because it's not martyr or martyr, it's martyr. Thank you for asking that follow-up question. I always want to try to be clear. I have a lot of videos teaching about flaps, and you can look at videos for like bedding and bedding with a T and a D, same sounds. It helps you teach that. I also have a video talking about the flap sounds in Spanish and how it's an R versus a T and a D in English, if you want to get into more detail and help for that. Okay, we have a question about the word successful. So successful. Stress here is on the ses syllable. So we have a schwa for our first letter U, the s. And then we have a K sound for the first letter C and an S sound for the second letter C. Success, success. We don't let that K out, so you'll hear it like suck, suck. You won't really hear it, but it'll keep that first vowel very short. Success. Then we have the eh vowel in our stress syllable. Double S says S. And then we have another schwa at the end. Successful. Successful. Yeah, that's a little bit tricky because the double C represents two separate sounds, a k and a s, but we don't really let that k sound out very strongly. Thank you. That's a good request. Okay. We have a question about whether I use a glottal stop when the sentence starts with a vowel. For example, on the subway, I was sitting between two very large men. I was on the subway. So it starts just on the vowel sound. I don't have to really do a hard glottal like on the subway. I also don't use like any sort of flow of air, not like on the subway. On the subway. This is really, I think, the most useful if people have difficulty between words that start with an H. Like if I was saying I was sitting. If you have a tendency to let too much air flow, you're going to hear it more like I was sitting. I was sitting. So I hear that happening for some speakers, like Italian speakers, sometimes Russian speakers, because of the way vowel onsets are in your language. So you can think of it as a glottal if it's helpful to really have a clear I was sitting. But you can have a relaxed onset too. I was sitting. You just don't want to let much time lapse or too much airflow, then it would sound like hi. So it's kind of about voice onset time. You don't need a hard glottal stop, but if you're someone who has this tendency, you may want to just go ahead and use that because it's not wrong to say I with a hard glottal stop. Using those can be tiring on the voice physically, so find that right balance for you where it sounds natural. And I'm not sure about, in general, American speakers, it may vary for the speaker how hard our onset is and whether there's a full glottal stop there or not. Okay. Question about whether we pronounce the T on the word plant. So if I'm just saying it by itself, I have a plant. I can either say the T or I can use an unreleased T. I have a plant. The plant is. If it doesn't end with T, if I'm not saying it by itself or I'm using it with a vowel, the plant is good. Then I'm going to hear that T. Yeah, the plant is operating. The plant is green. The plant is green. I can use a glottal stop there, but it affects my flow. If I'm saying the plant that I own, the plant that I water every week, I'm going to use that unreleased T where you won't hear it, but I'm not leaving it off, because what we don't want to hear is the plan that with a continuing N, the plan that I own. Versus the plant that I own. You still need to mark that T with that unreleased T, or it's going to sound like an N sound. So no simple answer to that question. It's okay to say the T when it's by itself. You'll often hear the unreleased T You mostly will hear the T if I'm saying the plant is good. Then you'll hear a light little T. Same thing that happens with T by itself at the ends of words, but it's a little more complicated with the NT. Very good. We have a question about how to pronounce the P when it comes after an S, for example, as in speak or space. So when we have SP blend, or same with ST blends, when the S is blended with a stop sound, we have what's called an unaspirated P there. So if I'm just saying peak or pace, I need a puff of air, peak, pace. When I say speak or space, there's no release of air there. You want to be careful not to make it so muted that it sounds like speak, but you couldn't really hear probably the difference between if that were a B voiced or a voiceless P. So the continuum is we have P at the start of words with a big puff of air, then we have unaspirated P, and then we have B. So you're kind of here for speak and space. I don't need to do speak. In fact, I can't and I shouldn't try to put air in there, but not so strong like speak. I don't want like a lot of voicing early. So it's kind of in between a P and a B, basically. Speak and space. I do have a video talking about these unaspirated stop sounds in S-blends, both in our Sounds of English course and here on the channel. If you leave a comment after class, I'll direct you to where you can find that video, or you can use the search box on the channel page and type in S-blends, and that should help you find that video. Great question. Thank you. A lot of sophisticated questions today. So a great audience. It's nice to see so many of you here, and we'll take a couple more questions before we wrap up for today. We have a question about which syllable to stretch in a word and do I have a video about how to do it. So there are patterns for which videos are stressed and therefore stretched. Unfortunately, you have to take it on a word-by-word basis. There are some patterns like nouns being stressed in the beginning and verbs being stressed in the end, like in record and record when there's the same word. But unfortunately, because we get our words in English from so many different sources, there aren't hard and fast rules. So the best thing that you can do is learn to read a dictionary if you're uncertain about where a word should be stressed. So for example, if we look at the word like produce, the verb, in the dictionary, it's going to show you two things to watch for. One, the unstressed and reduced syllables are going to often have a schwa or an I sound in them. And then you're going to see a line before where the stress goes. So in produce, the verb, you'll see this line before the deuce syllable, which means it's going to sound like produce. The deuce syllable is going to be the stressed syllable. It's going to be the one that's stretched out and longer and has a clear vowel. And then in a word like produce, the noun, you'll see the stress is in the first syllable, so that's where they'll put the line. And you'll see the O now becomes an O instead of an sound. Deuce is still a clear syllable here, but it's going to be shorter now. So I'm going to have produce, where this deuce is going to be faster. Produce, stretched it. Produce, not stretched, stressed on pro. But learning to find that symbol in the dictionary, that's going to show you which syllable has the stress. I do have videos teaching about this, and I also have videos teaching you a lot of the common words which are stressed on the first syllable versus the second syllable. That's both here on the channel and in my American Accent 6-week course, where we talk about word and syllable stress and intonation. I give you a good foundation for which words have which syllable stress. And most of the time, if you've learned words from hearing them, you're going to be stressing the correct syllable. If you learn words from reading them, you may need to double check that you're stressing in the right place. Especially if you have a similar word in your native language, it may not be stressed in the same way, and you might be using patterns from your native language to to choose how to stress words in English. There are some typical error patterns that I cover, so look at my videos for words with ation versus ated, for example, about stress patterns. You can look at our intonation playlist here on the channel, or as I mentioned in our American Accent 6-week course, we go through a lot of help for teaching you about knowing which syllable to stress within words. Okay, so many great questions today. I'm sorry I'm not going to have time to get to everyone's questions. If you left me a question in the chat and I didn't get to it, please go to the comments and just type your question in there or copy and paste it in there. I'll go back later, tally up those questions, give you answers, add your words to cover in a future class, or direct you to resources here on the channel or on our website to help you. Thanks so much for being a part of class today, and I look forward to seeing you in our upcoming videos here on the channel, as well as next Saturday in our live class. If you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please do so. It does help support us. Leaving questions, liking, commenting, that also helps the channel to grow. And of course, a big shout out to our channel members, those of you who have joined. I truly appreciate your support. Wonderful to see so many of you here today, and I hope you have a great weekend. Looking forward to seeing you in our next class. I'm Christine Dunbar from speechmodification.com. Remember, if you want to sound like a native speaker, you can do it. speechmodification.com. Bye, everyone. Thanks for a great class.